we don't smoke the same shit they do. What do I mean by that? Okay, so I'm kind of thinking of this in terms of like, well, from like an ecological perspective, like thinking about the ancients of species, the progression of species, right? Species of plants, of organic things, right? It's like these things, like if you go out into the environment as it is today, it is so different from even just like 100 years ago. I mean, you can say a big part of that is like colonization, right? The invasive species, like go to the fucking south, and it's like the kudzu vines have basically consumed that entire region of America. And like a couple hundred years ago, they were just not there. They were just not there. But they are like the single defining trait of like the environment over there. And it's like even on the level of like individual species and like from an evolutionary perspective and the ways that things develop over time. I mean, like even things, even plants, even animals, things in the same species look different than they did a couple hundred years ago. Like there's progress. I mean, look at us, I guess. If I don't know if that's a helpful reference, but like things change, right? Things change, and like biodiversity is in constant flux. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. It is constantly reinventing itself. And so when you look at like things that persist, like I mean, look at like the fucking trees, like the redwoods, right? Like the oldest trees are a couple hundred years old, and they go back however long. But it's like you go back even a couple thousand years beyond that, and it's like everything looks completely different, right? It's like the broad categorization of like how we divide plants and divide genus and whatever. It's like all of that develops over time. Like at one, like I mean, going back to the assumption that all of this comes from primordial soup or whatever. But at least in the tangible sense, we notice that things develop. We notice that things change. And so like in the same sense, so does the biodiversity. So do these organic substances that come from the earth, that come from plants, that are plants. They are plants at the end of the day. And it's like there are relate the thing about some. This is why I think it's important from also a sociological perspective, because the reality is that like organic substances and the practice of taking them for the like benefits of that occur on the basis of experience, right? On the basis of elevation of experience, elevation of sensory function, elevation of hallucinogens, psychedelics, all these kinds of things. Like they didn't just come out of nowhere. Like these have been integrated parts of society in many different ways since the beginning of time. And I think we forget often how much this is rooted within a very like rooted indigenous perspective, right? Of societies, that like the relationships with these kinds of things can only come out of people's original involvement in the environment, their understanding of the world around them, and the recognition of benefits that you can get from all types of plants, right? Like familiarity with very specific herbs. I think another thing we forget too is like when it comes to like even like vegetables and organic things that like we like food on the table, that in and of itself is a technology. That's a human technology. And I know we don't think about it in that way, but like the tomatoes as they exist today did not look the same as they did a couple hundred years ago. Like oranges, apples, like they have been so optimized and so like selectively bred, basically, right? It germinated to be consumables, to be products for us now in the modern day, that like they barely even resemble what they were like a couple hundred years ago. Like you could not tell the difference, right? Between or sorry, you could most definitely tell the difference between a genetically modified tomato of today and something that would just have grown naturally in the Mediterranean. I don't actually know where tomatoes are from, guys. I'm so sorry. But anyways, my point with that being, right, it's like when we encounter these things in terms of product, right, in terms of things that we buy at a market and not necessarily that we go scrounge in the forest, like that is a commodification, right? And there's such a depersonalizing aspect to that commodification, where it's like we don't really connect these things with where they come from, the culture that they originate, the actual interaction of how people even discovered that these things have benefits at all. And the interesting thing, I was reading this book. Actually, I have it right here. Oh, perfect. Fifth Sun. It's kind of it's about the Aztec Mexica Empire, kind of a historiography of like basically the recorded history that we do have prior to and then throughout their colonization, because it's definitely an underrepresented perspective on like actually what happened during that takeover and genocide everything that is it's a mess. It's a big mess. But there was a segment that kind of inspired this whole idea, right? Where they were kind of discussing the cultures and the practices of the Aztecs and their use of psychedelic and hallucinatory plant medicine at the time, through the plant of it's called the datura. And the interesting characteristic about this is that it's not that there was actually anything pleasurable about this experience. Like, actually quite the opposite, right? It's like there's a whole I did some digging for no reason in particular, on so and ended up on a Wikipedia page that is essentially describing like the Europeans' first contact with this drug, that is very strong, very intense, almost like salvia-esque, kind of in the sense that it's like kind of absurd. Like it produces these kind of almost disturbing kind of like images and behaviors within the user, within people that take it, especially within, Europeans that, fucking chuds and bums on this ship that like start going hysterical, right, on their first encounter. But within Aztec Mexica culture, this drug was actually like very much integrated. I don't even want to call it drug. This plant medicine was very much integrated within society as like as a testament to like essentially people's mental fortitude. It was like it was taken recreationally as a means of literally like proving one's mental strength, proving one's ability to handle that level of like that level of distress and still persist, and to maintain their self-concept, and to not go hysterical, and to not go crazy, basically. It was almost like I don't even know. I don't want to say hyper masculine. I know that it was definitely coded as like something that was like a more like a not upper class activity, but like, yeah, I don't want to presuppose the role that it played within Mexican society. But my point here is that, like, these things have always been present within human society, and then B, that our relationship with them most definitely is in flux. It changes based upon the time and place that we're in. And so, like, I won't, again, without even getting into like the criminalization of things like marijuana and like whatever, crack cocaine, like the way that these things basically become almost like political chess pieces, right, and as a means of control. But I think there is something there, right, because it's like when we really do consider that like the knowledge and the awareness of these things and the benefit that they can actually provide to us does come from essentially indigenous like herbal and like spiritualist knowledge, and like really deep authentic connections with the land and the place in which these things were originally taken and used by these original cultures before they become commodified, before they become mass produced and created into essentially like farm technology, basically, to be marketed to us. It's like there's a very localized, specific quality to that I think that is subversive, and I think that's why it is so controlled. That narrative is so controlled. And I think, again, to go back to this notion of like the depersonalization of these substances, I think that, at least for me, something that I try to practice and I try to keep in mind when interacting with these things is the curation of like a relationship with it. And this is pretty common. Like people will bring this up in terms of like addiction, right? at least when it comes to like these things, certain like particular substances. It's like, it's not the thing, it's your relationship to it, which is true, right? But let's carry that all the way, right? Let's actually give identity to these things, which are organic matter specifically, like organic substances specifically, things that are derived from pieces of the environment and not just made in a lab, right? And that, in that sense, these things are actual, like, they are plant. It's a plant. Okay. And this is why it's so like I've heard the practice of, like, for instance, setting the intention with particular organic substances, and like the difference that makes, and like and like acknowledging that this is another living thing, right, that you are consuming, that you are interacting with, and almost in essence having a conversation with. I mean, if we really get into, like, okay, let's take mushrooms, for instance, as a psychedelic, as a naturally occurring psychedelic, mycelium networks. Like, these things communicate with each other. They have languages. They have a certain level of consciousness, to the degree that they can exchange electromagnetic information in the exact same function as our brains. And it's not just mushrooms, okay? Because, like, all plants actually communicate. There are numerous studies that show that plants communicate with each other on the most fundamental level. Like, anytime you step outside into an environment, all the trees, all the shrubs, all the anything that is alive is sending is in communication with one another. They 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 they're able to communicate, and there are, again, do your own research on this, but in terms of identifying threats, collaboration. I mean, you can even see that, like, there are trees, right, that grow, and they're able to recognize and sense without encroaching on each other's space, and that's how you get these, like, natural chasms between, like, leaves and branches that allow sunlight to then come into like a forest floor, and actually, then support, like, lower level shrubbery, and all of this is good. Like, all of it is mutually beneficial to these plants. And even on the most fundamental, like, I really do, I love plants, guys. If I turn this camera around right here, you would see I have, like, a whole shelf of like, just, like, little of, like, I'm almost ashamed to domesticated plants, guys. I know I'm evil. I've domesticated them. I've taken them out of their natural habitat. But, like, they have a will to live. They have a will to live, I think. And if they don't, then they die. Duh. And, like, I really do believe that, like, plants and the way that they grow, I think, is just it's really, like, on a fundamental level, it's one of the most beautiful allegories that we have for, like, just existence and life and, like, growth in general. Like, I think that they're so inspiring in that sense, in the way that, like, the way they and I don't know, you want to get down to the fundamental, like, Fibonacci, like, fractal, like, ways that grow. Like, plants learn. Like, you can teach them to, even though that is, more of, like, it's kind of a human concept, something that we kind of project onto them, that we can kind of, I mean, look at a bonsai, right? Look at how adeptly and acutely you can sort of train and teach and shape this living thing to recognize it, to essentially recognize itself, to recognize its own boundaries, and to exist within that and persist within that. Like, I think that is so inspiring, like, on just a fundamental level of recognizing another, like, living thing, something that I think has consciousness. And this is the interesting thing, right? When you get to, like psilocybin networks, and, like, networks between plant species, like, do you think that they differentiate between each other? Like, do you think that they have individual, like, the construct of individuality within them, or do you think that they just function as a species? Do you think that they just conceptualize themselves as part of this larger whole? And that's why I really feel like when we take this approach, when we have this approach of, like, a relationship with a species, with a living thing, that it can almost become kind of transcendent, especially on the level of, on the level of, like, ancestral veneration. And, like, if you do have, like, a culture or a tradition, that you bear, that you are a product of, that has had a relationship with a particular like, plant or substance or use in the past, I feel like there's almost, like, a very unique opportunity that you have to rekindle and kind of contribute to, that ancestral relationship, which you can continue into the present with this other, in communicating with this other living thing, that has also experienced, that has also, like, gone through levels of time, and persists, on the level that, like, the connection that we have with our ancestors is kind of born in the same sense as, like a plant within the larger species, right? On that same level. And it's like, if we can conceptualize these things as, like relationally, things that we can interact with, and that our ancestors have interacted with in the past, it's like it becomes added to just this ongoing process of just being able to actually reconnect with the environment, being able to reconnect with, the social relationships that our ancestors and that these cultures once had with their environment and with each other, and in a past social order, in a sense, and but then also been able to begin to kind of, like, redefine that, and begin to kind of, embody that, and take that into your own, and integrate that into your own, order, your own way of life, your own way of, experiencing and mediating these things. And anyways, I think a lot. I also think too of, like, smoking as ceremony too, and like, when we come to define things relationally, right? And like, or just, not that is the smoking is the only way that we can consume or can interact with these things, but, like, just that the act of attaching something, right? The act of attaching this process to a ritual, to a practice, to something which has a very traditional, very ancestral, um meaning. I think is one of the most, like, I don't know. I just think it's one of the most beautiful things that we can curate in a relationship to these organic substances and to these things which are, again, ultimately just plants. Just they are living, breathing things, products of environments, who experience history in just the same way as us. Who are in displaced and kind of invasive in the very same manner as like as humans, right? Like as opposed to invasive species and endangered species, and it's like there is a natural allegory for everything that like literally everything that you could possibly conceive of. And so again, um this is not I don't want this to be I don't want this to be like a like I'm not saying you should go out and take the craziest most I'm not actually encouraging anything. I'm not encouraging anything, okay? This is purely like, interpret it as you will. I haven't I don't think I've stated overtly what it is that I'm speaking about here, but at least I know that from my experience there are particular substances, right? Things that plants and substances that are indigenous to the Americas, that have been a part of our ancestors' culture for millennium, for hundreds of years. And I think that if we can get a little bit closer to recognizing the ways that they once interacted with these things and the ways that they once had perceptions of their societies and their environment and the use of these things and the function of them, in that sense, we can not only begin to cultivate more healthier relationships with these things in our own life, but also just in our conception of like cultivating a relationship with our ancestors as well, cultivating a relationship with ourselves. And yeah, just I mean everything. I don't think that I just recorded this video about how the fuck it we ball meant, not no, fuck around and find out, not fuck it we ball, but fuck around and find out. And this kind of is related to that, I guess. But I didn't even really touch on like the ritualism, the ceremony of it, the fact that there is, yeah, there's just power within there's power within ritual, within ceremony, within this thing that is a celebration. It is a celebratory act, and that in and of itself I think is subversive and should be brought like it is as soon as this perceived lack, right, enters into a relationship with a substance, that is when like addiction becomes bad, right? That is when addiction becomes dangerous, because it becomes necessary and less so additive. It becomes you become dependent instead of grateful. It's an attitude of lack and not gratitude. And when it comes to the fact that we can even still commune with these things and still have these frameworks and have access to these social functions in the same sense that our ancestors did, that we should have an attitude of gratefulness towards that, and we should have a very curious mindset about how these things once defined our societies, as they were once much more connected and much more in tune with the environment, than we are now. And it's a very unfortunate byproduct of colonialism and consumerist culture. But yeah, so I just thought I'd put this out there. So take it how you will. Um, please don't do anything. Please don't do anything that will put yourself in harm's way, or endanger your sanity, or that is illegal. Yeah. Bye.